Madam Speaker, I have the honour to lay on the table the draft agreement in respect of Gibraltar between the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland of the one part, and the European Union and the European Economic Energy Community of the other part.
Ordered to lie.
Madam Speaker, with your leave, I wish to make a government statement. A few moments ago, I've had the honour to lay in this Parliament the draft agreement in respect of Gibraltar between the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland of the one part, and the European Union and the European Atomic Energy Community of the other part. What I've laid in this Parliament is the UK version of the text. The same text has been deposited in the libraries of the House of Commons and the House of Lords also in the last few moments at 9 o'clock GMT. The European Union has today also at 10 o'clock CET published on its website the EU version of this draft agreement. As the House and the public are aware, I have provided a copy of the text to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition on Privy Council terms, which he was free to share with his MPs ahead of publication today. A copy was also shared with the news editors of the national broadcaster, the Gibraltar Broadcasting Corporation, and the newspaper of record, the Gibraltar Chronicle, on terms of a strict embargo so that they could familiarise themselves with the text and report its contents to our people after today. I thank both of those responsible news organisations for having respected the embargo imposed. The United Kingdom and Gibraltar on the one hand, and the European Union and Spain on the other, are working hand in hand together to ensure that this agreement can be brought into effect as soon as possible and provide certainty for the people and the economy of Gibraltar. In this context, the United Kingdom and we in Gibraltar are publishing the draft agreement alongside the EU, while legal teams complete the final legal review and translation of the text. This is to ensure that all the parliaments with an interest have access to it on the same timeline. In the United Kingdom, the final version of the agreement has, as I've said a moment ago, been laid before Parliament for scrutiny before the ratification process commences in accordance with the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act of 2010. That, Madam Speaker, is what is colloquially known as the Cragg procedure, Madam Speaker. The text of the treaty that we have spent the better part of half a decade negotiating is now public. Our people can see it for themselves. The text will now be on the government's own website and a dedicated treaty website, which will be treaty.gov.gi. And unless the technical gremlins have affected us, that should be live now. Everyone can now read the text, all 1,018 pages of it in the UK formatting. Everyone can now understand what the new proposed arrangements for immigration and movement of goods will be. And this is what this agreement is about. New arrangements for fluidity of people and a free-flowing frontier on goods. Of course, that will require new arrangements for passport and border checks and new arrangements for customs formalities. A new facility for passport checks will be built at our airport so we can carry out cumulative passport checks on arrivals from third countries. Madam Speaker, a nation that cannot control its own borders ceases to be a nation. That is why in this agreement, the first hand on the gate remains a British hand. The first check is a British check. We are removing the physical barriers of a bygone era of friction, but we are keeping the keys to our own front door firmly in our own pockets. We choose cooperation, but we retain control. This will require the construction of a new addendum to the airport, which will be equidistant between Gibraltar and Spain. I've dealt with those issues in some detail since the New Year's Eve agreement of 2020. A temporary facility will be established ahead of completion of works on the final second line check facility. This is what has slipped into the local lexicon as the Schengen Shack, for shorthand, for some time now. Those are the things that we announced back then at the time of the New Year's Eve Framework Agreement. This is the technical detail now behind those arrangements. Additionally, the treaty provides for new arrangements for goods to move in and out of Gibraltar, new rates of indirect taxation, the abolition of import duties, the introduction of a new transaction tax. But Gibraltar will remain entirely VAT-free. The application will come of EU excise duties. Again, all of these things have already been announced. Business has been briefed. We will have a shorter transition than we wished for businesses to adapt to the new criteria. But this is not by choice of the government. It is by dint of the operation of the calendar which requires the application of the EU's entry-exit system from the 10th of April this year. And we will be working with businesses and their representatives to ameliorate the effect of this tighter than anticipated timeline for implementation. Because this agreement, Madam Speaker, is a very positive opportunity to move our country forward from Brexit. But it is not perfect. We have to be clear that this is not an agreement that we chose to negotiate. It is an agreement that we have had to negotiate, because the UK's departure from the European Union has required that we address the alternative to the daily full application of the Schengen Border Code and the European entry-exit system, because Brexit left us exposed. It left us, Madam Speaker, as sitting ducks. We needed to avoid a hard border. That is the reality of the situation in which we have found ourselves for the past desolate decade. It is indeed now, Madam Speaker, exactly 10 years and 6 days since David Cameron announced that there would be a referendum on whether the United Kingdom should leave the European Union on the 23rd of June 2016. That announcement, which he made on the steps of Downing Street on the 20th of February 2016, set off the chain reaction that leads us to today. And Madam Speaker, in a globalized world, isolation is not independence. It is a dead end. By securing access to a market of 480 million people, we are giving our businesses the platform they need to compete and win. But this isn't just about trade. It's about a modern, vibrant Gibraltar taking its place at the heart of the European economy. It's about jobs that produce PAYE and social insurance payments that will grow our public finances. It's about investment, and it's about the future. And whatever anybody asks whether this is the right agreement for Gibraltar, they should also ask themselves this: what is the alternative? Indeed, what is the viable alternative? And perhaps more relevant, what is the negotiable alternative? Because we can all imagine alternatives to this. We can all wish for different terms. But these are the terms which are negotiable and deliverable. I've said before, we have not spent 5 years dictating to Spain and to the European Union the terms that they have to accept from us. Not even the United Kingdom was able to do that when it sought its own trade and cooperation agreement. In fact, in respect of the United Kingdom's negotiation with the European Union, we saw the opposite play out on our television news screens. But this, Madam Speaker, is the agreement that is negotiable, whilst each of the sides has been maintaining our separate fundamentals and those of our negotiating counterparts who have also obligations to maintain and red lines to observe. And this agreement, imperfect though it no doubt is, Madam Speaker, therefore presents us with a viable, useful, and enviable opportunity to leverage a position of weakness into a position of viability and growth. It is safe, it is secure, and it is beneficial for Gibraltar. It provides a springboard to stability, certainty, and modern partnership with the European Union. And it does so without affecting our fundamental, inalienable right to remain British in every single respect. Indeed, the agreement makes absolutely clear that nothing in the agreement or any supplementing arrangements shall affect sovereignty. Let's be clear about how important that is, and not just to us. Article 1 of the treaty sets out the purpose of it. Honourable members will see that it sets out that the objective of this agreement is to establish a mutually cooperative relationship between the parties, which also promotes shared prosperity and close and constructive relations in respect of Gibraltar and the adjacent area in the Kingdom of Spain, in particular the territory of the municipalities that make up the Mancomunidad de Municipios del Campo de Gibraltar. Immediately after that, in the second article, is the specific article on sovereignty. And it reads as follows. This agreement, any supplementing agreements as referred to in Article 3, any administrative arrangements or other arrangements related to this agreement, and any measures or instruments or conduct taken in application or as a result thereof, or pursuant thereto, shall be without prejudice to, and shall not otherwise affect, the respective legal positions of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, or of the Kingdom of Spain, with regard to sovereignty and jurisdiction, and shall not constitute the basis for any assertion or denial of sovereignty, including in legal proceedings or otherwise. It could not be clearer, Madam Speaker. And note that the clause refers not just to the agreement and any agreements or arrangements flowing from it being without prejudice to the respective legal positions of the UK and Spain on sovereignty and jurisdiction. It is also any conduct taken in application or as a result thereof that is excluded from creating prejudice in respect of sovereignty. This is undoubtedly the tightest without prejudice clause which we have seen in the history of EU documentation in relation to Gibraltar. But it is not the only reference to sovereignty in the text. That clause is actually repeated specifically and in whole by way of footnote in Article 271, which is an article on the airport. Paragraph 6 of Article 301 on the scope of the dispute settlement aspects of the treaty also provides another carve-out on sovereignty. It states specifically that this part does not apply to any disputes with regard to sovereignty and jurisdiction. If the respondent party submits a reasoned statement to the arbitration tribunal to the effect that the request may affect the legal position of the United Kingdom or of the Kingdom of Spain, or with regard to sovereignty and jurisdiction, the arbitration tribunal shall not decide on the dispute with regard to sovereignty and jurisdiction, or on any matter that requires or implies a decision on sovereignty or jurisdiction, and shall immediately declare its lack of jurisdiction on matters regarding sovereignty and jurisdiction, or having an effect thereon. Any decisions adopted in the framework of this part, including decisions and rulings by an arbitration tribunal, shall not produce any legal effects, direct or indirect, on the legal position of the United Kingdom or of the Kingdom of Spain with regard to sovereignty and jurisdiction. And also, Madam Speaker, in Annex 37, in the Protocol on Mutual Administrative Assistance in Customs Matters, in Article 11, there is set out the following: exceptions to the obligation to provide assistance. And paragraph 1A of those exceptions says this: assistance under this protocol may be refused or may be subject to the satisfaction of certain conditions or requirements in cases where a party is of the opinion that such assistance would A, be likely to prejudice the sovereignty of the United Kingdom in respect of Gibraltar, or that of a member state which has been requested to provide assistance under this protocol. So, Madam Speaker, the premise on which we entered this negotiation is secured. British sovereignty is not in any way compromised. And we have achieved that, Madam Speaker, working hand in glove with successive administrations of His Majesty's governments of the United Kingdom. We have been one integrated UK-Gibraltar negotiating team, and the fruit of that work is now before the House and our people. Madam Speaker, a high-level overview of this text might be useful to the House and to the people of Gibraltar. I therefore want to share with the House the summary that the United Kingdom is providing alongside the document in the libraries of both the Houses of Parliament in the United Kingdom. Where I deviate from the summary, I shall indicate that I'm doing so, Madam Speaker. Part 1 of the agreement, Madam Speaker, we're told in that summary, defines the overall purpose of establishing a mutually cooperative relationship between Gibraltar and the EU that promotes shared prosperity for Gibraltar and the surrounding region in Spain. It recognizes shared values and the principles of democracy, the rule of law, and respect for human rights, as well as commitment to fight against climate change and cooperate on counterterrorism. As I've already explained, Article 2 of the agreement makes clear that nothing in the agreement or any supplementing arrangements shall affect sovereignty. There is no direct application of EU law to Gibraltar through the agreement or any enforcement role for the Court of Justice of the European Union in Gibraltar. Part 1 contains provisions confirming how Gibraltar's domestic legal system will incorporate EU law where alignment is required, and confirms it will be enforced by Gibraltar's own authorities and courts. Madam Speaker, I deviate a little from the summary now to just highlight that this is hugely important. The laws that will give effect to this treaty will be the laws made in this Parliament. Madam Speaker, the summary goes on to say that the first part also contains provisions covering the protection of personal data to enable the necessary free flow of personal data between Gibraltar and the EU, to make the provisions of this treaty operationally viable without the need for a data adequacy decision for Gibraltar, in return for Gibraltar's continued alignment with key EU data protection rules. In addition, the agreement creates the governance structures needed to manage and oversee cooperation. It establishes a cooperation council supported by 3 specialized committees to supervise implementation, facilitate dialogue, and adopt decisions where the agreement provides for them. Part 2 of the agreement establishes a new system for the movement of persons, designed to remove all routine immigration checks and physical barriers at the land border, while maintaining stability and security across Gibraltar and the Schengen area. Gibraltar will remain outside both Schengen and the EU, but Schengen border rules will apply to its external border under a tailored arrangement between the UK and the EU. The agreement provides that all necessary immigration checks will take place at Gibraltar's airport and, if needed, the port, rather than at the land border. But, Madam Speaker, I should observe that we will ensure that those checks are never needed at the port by restricting traffic to the quantities that can be handled properly at the airport facility alone. This will ensure that people cleared at the airport will be able to travel freely between Gibraltar, Spain, and the wider Schengen area, meaning an end to often lengthy queues for businesses, workers, and visitors crossing the land border. Separate arrangements in this part ensure that relevant military personnel are exempt from Schengen border checks. The operation of border crossing points, the sequencing of checks by Gibraltar and Spain, the use of automated systems, and the arrangements for second-line checks are also further defined in this part. The agreement includes provisions on visa-free travel, residence rights for persons resident in Gibraltar, and coordinated procedures for the approval of new or renewed residence permits. These provisions will ensure that residence permits that will allow access to the Schengen area are granted in line with key provisions of EU law designed to protect public safety and security. Madam Speaker, I deviate a little from the United Kingdom's summary now to say a little more about this, given some erroneous media reporting on it. First of all, let's be clear. Any rules on residence do not apply to Gibraltarians. The issue of ID cards for registered Gibraltarians is a matter exclusively for Gibraltar, without any requirement to check against any European system. If you are born a Gibraltarian, you are registered as a Gibraltarian by Gibraltar. Full stop. The issue of residence permits for foreign nationals seeking to reside in Gibraltar will also remain, under Gibraltar law, exclusively a matter for the Gibraltar authorities. We will nonetheless now agree, under this part of the treaty, to a consultation with the Schengen authorities in respect of foreign nationals seeking to reside in Gibraltar, to ensure that there are no issues of public health, public security, or public policy which might lead us to want to revoke or not grant such a permit. The consultation that we will carry out is, unsurprisingly, standard between member states of Schengen, who are required to check new applications for residence on the Schengen information system themselves. We shall do it, Madam Speaker, through Spain as the neighbouring member state, because we don't otherwise have access to the Schengen information system. It is, in effect, Madam Speaker, a consultation with the SIS database and all Schengen states, but done through our neighbour. The right to seek to prevent the grant of a future residence permit or the renewal of an existing one is not, Madam Speaker, a veto. It is a subject to the individual's right of appeal, and it is based on a reproduction of the part of language which is in Article 27 of Regulation 2018-1861. Member states of Schengen can veto the grant of short-stay visas by another member state of Schengen, again, subject to the right of appeal of the individual in question. That is what will apply here. On public health and public security, the terminology speaks for itself. The person must need to be known to create a danger to public health or a danger to public security. On public policy grounds, the reasoning may be more complex, but it cannot be based on fanciful grounds. The reasonings for such objections are at the very highest level of concern for the protection of civil society, and that is specifically provided for in the treaty, as the relevant footnote sets out, by spelling out what the Court of Justice of the European Union has said, namely, that measures taken on the grounds of public policy shall be proportionate and shall be based exclusively on the personal conduct of the individual concerned, which must represent a genuine, present and sufficiently serious threat affecting one of the fundamental interests of society. There is no higher test in EU law than this one before the public policy exemption can be engaged to seek to prevent the issue of a visa, short stay, or in Gibraltar's case, a residence permit against an individual, subject to that person's right of appeal. Madam Speaker, I cannot imagine circumstances in which we would want to grant a residence permit to such an individual. But if we wanted to, we could, of course, grant such a permit, although that would breach the treaty and it would bring consequences if not resolved via the dispute resolution aspects of it. Far from that approach, I hope we will all instead welcome this additional layer of protection for our people, as we will be able now to check against two databases, not one, before granting such permits. Returning now, Madam Speaker, to the summary. In the area of security and cooperation, the agreement provides for enhanced law enforcement cooperation to address shared threats based on arrangements agreed between the UK and the EU in the TCA and expanded where needed. The agreement also creates mechanisms for evaluation, monitoring, and where required, temporary suspension of obligations in cases of serious non-compliance or security threats. Part 3 of the agreement establishes a comprehensive framework for economic and trade cooperation that supports open and fair competition, sustainable development, and fluid movement of goods across the land border, as well as containing important provisions on transport. The agreement establishes a bespoke customs model between Gibraltar and the European Union, removing tariffs, duties, and quotas on goods moving between them. It delivers enhancements to Gibraltar's existing indirect taxation system that brings certain tax rates closer to those in the EU without adopting VAT or any form of sales tax. To achieve fluid movement across the border operationally, the majority of goods destined for Gibraltar will be cleared by EU customs officers in Spain, as they are today, so they can enter Gibraltar without further checks. Separate bespoke arrangements for this part ensure the continued movement of military goods to Gibraltar. The agreement also includes provisions on labour standards, taxation and sustainability, environmental protection, climate commitments, and state aid control. Under this framework, Gibraltar will maintain high standards, for example, by establishing an independent state aid regime, while maintaining regulatory flexibility. In addition, the agreement contains an aviation chapter that will provide new economic opportunities for the region by enabling flights between Gibraltar and the EU, which have, for the most part, been suspended for decades. A joint venture company will be established between Gibraltar and Spain to select, through regular public tender, and supervise the commercial company in charge of day-to-day management of the airport, and Gibraltar will incorporate a small number of EU civil aviation rules into our domestic regime. The RAF base at the airfield is not in the scope of the agreement. In addition to aviation, there are chapters covering maritime and road transport services between Gibraltar and the EU. Part 4, Madam Speaker, of the agreement defines the rights of workers who live in one territory and work in another, ensuring they continue to benefit from clarity, certainty, and fair treatment. It provides mechanisms for social security coordination so that contributions, entitlements, and benefits can be administered without disruption. These provisions mean that cross-border workers enjoy a secure framework for employment, supporting the integrated labour market between Gibraltar and the surrounding region. Importantly, Madam Speaker, and now deviate from the summary, as a result of this treaty, we are now able to move to equalisation of the pensionable age between men and women at the age of 60 in Gibraltar. Equalisation will be given effect to in the next appropriation bill to be taken in this House. Returning now to the summary, Madam Speaker. Part 5 of the agreement establishes a financial mechanism to promote cohesion between Gibraltar and the surrounding region. The parties to this will contribute to this mechanism by funding initiatives such as education and training. Part 6 provides a mechanism for resolving disputes, including a process of consultations between the parties and referral to an independent arbitration tribunal. This is the dispute settlement part of the treaty. It also includes provisions on compliance and proportionate remedies in case there is non-compliance. And Part 7 sets out the necessary legal and administrative provisions of the agreement's operation, including rules and procedures for review, entry into force, and termination. The territorial scope of the agreement makes clear that it applies to the territory of Gibraltar and not the wider United Kingdom. There are a range of annexes, appendices, and protocols to the agreement, numbering 43 in total, Madam Speaker. These supplement the main chapters of the agreement with further detail regarding how they will function in practice. That, Madam Speaker, is the summary that the United Kingdom has laid in the libraries of the House of Lords and the House of Commons this morning. Madam Speaker, it's not up to every citizen to read this text, although everyone is free to do so. Indeed, I imagine, Madam Speaker, that ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, and DeepSeek will soon know it off by heart as it is fed into them by citizens, politicians, and journalists around the world. Different prompts will produce different AI answers, no doubt. But let us be clear about what our responsibilities are in this House. We, on this side of the House, were elected into government to negotiate the treaty alongside our UK colleagues. We all, on both sides of the House, are elected to scrutinise it. We're elected to make a decision on whether to call on the United Kingdom to ratify this text. And we will do that when the time comes to consider the text in the debate on the motion. I am today, Madam Speaker, giving you written notice of that motion, the text of which will read as follows. This House calls upon His Majesty's Government of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland to ratify, for the benefit of Gibraltar and its people, the agreement in respect of Gibraltar between the United Kingdom and the European Union following negotiations conducted by the Government of Gibraltar alongside the United Kingdom for and on behalf of Gibraltar, and which His Majesty's Government of Gibraltar has tabled in this House on the 26th of February 2026. I've shared the text of the motion with the Leader of the Opposition before I have presented it to the House today. I expect I will be moving that motion during the course of next week. And so, Madam Speaker, today is but one of a number of seminal moments for this Parliament. Indeed, this is likely only the first of a number of such moments that we are going to face in coming days and weeks. Because we're coming to consider the new relationship with Europe that will enable us to operate socio-economically in a way that will deliver opportunities for success for current and future generations of Gibraltarians. And if the motion to seek ratification passes, we will have to deliver new laws to implement that ratification. But it is not the first time that this House will have had to consider these types of economy-changing issues. In October 1972, the House of Assembly considered the bill for a European Communities Ordinance. It was the first meeting for business of the first AACR government under the 1969 Constitution. It was the first meeting of the House for business attended by a man then in his early 30s, now the father of the House. In ending his presentation of that bill, Sir Joshua Hassan said a number of things which are as pertinent today when contemplating this treaty as they were then in contemplation of our accession to the European Economic Community and the Treaty of Rome. I want to wind down my statement to the House today quoting exactly the words that Sir Joshua uttered then. He said this, and this is a quote: "The enlarged United Europe, of which Gibraltar will soon be a small part, is a great enterprise and one in which we should all be glad and proud to share. I have dealt in my speech on the second reading of this bill with a number of technical matters affecting our laws. We are also, of course, considering, as my honourable friend the Minister for Tourism said in his statement yesterday, the economic aspects of Gibraltar's membership with a view to ensuring that the new arrangements do not work to our economic detriment. But we must not, I think, allow our preoccupation with the legal and economic technicalities of entry into the common market, important though those are for our material welfare and for the orderly progress of our society, to obscure the wider and less tangible possibilities and benefits which can accrue to us all as a result of this amalgamation of economic interests. It may be," he said, "many years before a wider appreciation of the brotherhood of man comes about, and before physical and other national barriers are removed. But at least we are starting on the right road, and I am certain that future generations, while wondering why it took us so long, will thank us for having taken it in the end. Although Gibraltar will only be a minute part of this new enlarged community, we here have perhaps a particular interest in the long-term aims and effects of this gathering together for the common benefit of peoples of different nationalities, but of similar historical backgrounds, civilizations, and cultures. We can therefore, I think, Madam Speaker, only welcome this movement towards a united Europe, express the hope that the development of its political and human aspects will gather speed and momentum, and from a local point of view, that it will eventually lead to a solution of our difficulties. I am sure that the patience we have exercised in the past, and which we will need to continue in the future, will at some future date be rewarded. It is in that spirit that I earnestly commend this bill to the House." That ends the quote from Sir Joshua. Madam Speaker, Joshua Hassan, perhaps exceptionally, was not contradicted by Joe Bossano on that speech. Indeed, I think he spoke 54 years ago from where I am speaking now, for what many of us may think now also about this treaty. The years have passed. The barriers have finally come down between many countries. The alternative to this treaty is that we allow harder barriers to go up between us and the rest of the European continent. That is not the future, Madam Speaker. That is the past. Now we have a chance to make the opposite the reality. After years of political and diplomatic hostilities, physical barriers can come down between us and our neighbor, just as physical barriers have come down between those who suffered years of war between them in Central and Northern Europe. Today, they live in harmony, respect, and peaceful coexistence. Today, this is our chance also to start to live in harmony, respect, and peaceful coexistence with our neighbors too. That patience Sir Joshua so eloquently talked about as a Jewish man who had lived through the horrors of the Second World War, the human aspects that he referred to, all of those references by him resonate around this House today as powerfully in his memory as they would have done in his voice half a century ago. This is our chance, Madam Speaker. I trust that when we come to debate the motion, the whole House will be up to the task of working not in the partisan interest, but ready to take a step in the direction of that road Sir Joshua referred to when he was certain that future generations, while wondering why it took us all so long, will thank us for having taken it in the end. Because it is time now to stop looking at history and start looking up at the future. Because politics is at its best, Madam Speaker, when it stops looking in the rearview mirror and starts looking straight out through the windshield, seeing through the fog of now to the future beyond, Looking straight at this text and not getting stuck like a deer in the headlights of the opportunities that it presents us with. Madam Speaker, I've said at the beginning of my address that this treaty is not perfect. No treaty ever is. Every treaty is a compromise. But there is nothing to fear here. There are no hidden traps. And the ghosts of the past, though we should stay conscious of the harm that they did us, should not be allowed to dampen our ambition for a better future for our children. This is the right, viable and negotiable alternative to facing the European entry-exit system and long delays every day at the frontier. This is a better alternative to the full application of the Schengen Border Code every day. This is a better way forward for British Gibraltar than the morass of frontier formalities that will be in our way without it. And I'm conscious, Madam Speaker, that members of the government have asked me to give way before I finish my address on this statement, because there are things that they too feel that I should allow them to say, and I therefore give way to the Honourable the Deputy Chief Minister.